welcome to On Air at Groundswell with me, Farmers Guardian's online editor, Emily Ashworth. This is a special series for the Farmers Guardian podcast brought to you by the School of Sustainable Food and Farming at Harper Adams University. This session is all about nutrition and the role that farmers can play in the health of the nation. We've got a fantastic panel and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So we'll start at that end, I think. If you want to go first, Rosa.
Yeah, so my name's Rosa and I am a British Dietetic Association registered dietitian. I have been working in the NHS for 10 years. I am also a BASIS registered environmental advisor. So I work for the Soil Association Exchange, helping to advise farmers on how to manage their soils and their animal health and all kinds of different things. So it's a diverse role, yeah.
Thank you. Ed?
Hi, yeah, so I'm Ed Brown. I'm head of farming for WildFarmed. I spent the first 10 years of my career as an agronomist and farm management consultant, and then joined WildFarmed in January as head of farming. Very briefly, WildFarmed is a food business that procures wheat, largely wheat from UK farmers, grown to our third-party audited regenerative standards, and we pay them a premium for that wheat, and then we turn that into flour and bread. And you can see us in Tesco's now as of 2 weeks ago.
Yeah. So, thank you. Emily?
My name's Emily Linton. I'm a farm animal veterinary surgeon and have been for the past 19 years. And increasingly the focus in my role is around sustainable farming practices. And until very recently, I've also been part of the Farming Futures team at the Food Farming and Countryside Commission.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, thanks for being here. The health of the nation is obviously quite a big topic right now, big conversation. Just a straightforward first question. How do you see farmers playing a key role in supporting human health?
Yeah, I'll maybe take that. Everyone just looked at me there. Yeah, I think what we have to remember is that farmers already meet our expectations for producing food and fuel and fibre and mitigating climate change and improving air and water quality and allowing us to improve nature and public spaces. So the expectation on them, we need to acknowledge how much they already do. And for some farmers, it's natural to them to want to explore and be curious about what else they can grow. And that's really exciting for us to think about what else we can diversify into on farm that will ultimately be food for us, right? So that's a really nice thing to think about. But that doesn't come naturally to farmers, not everybody. You know, I met a dairy farmer actually the other week and he was like, anyone who walks onto my farm, I'm happy to show them around because I work to such a high standard. I make sure that we produce food to such a high standard and I'm happy to share this. But for other farmers, that doesn't come naturally because they've gone into farming because they are good at crop and animal husbandry, stewards of the land. So for them, they need to make sure that there is a route to market there and we need to support them to do that. But for sure, there is, especially with the climate changing, there is definitely opportunity to diversify what we grow, and that's really exciting for diets.
Yeah, I would just add, I think every farmer I work with, their ultimate goal is healthy animals, in their system because, it makes the job more enjoyable and it produces that good quality end product. So, I think they've got that huge role, and we know that there's a massive link to dietary health that costs the NHS millions of pounds. And so if we can make that better link between healthy food we produce on farm to human health, then, that benefits society as a whole.
Yeah, definitely.
Was the question, what was the role that farmers have in...
Yeah, what role do you see farmers playing
I mean, they're
in human health?
Front and centre of it, really, isn't it? I mean, they, as you said, they're already producing our food. I think there's more to be done in terms of switching the focus from what largely agriculture is globally, which is commodities, into what we see as actual food. And also then there's how we grow it. So there's a lot of food produced. The quality of that is obviously variable, and that's probably something we're going to get into. It's also, a lot of it's out of their hands. They might produce a raw ingredient, but then it's how somebody else turns that into food that makes it good or bad. So, yeah.
And there have been great examples. So, for example, I'm from Aberdeenshire. We've got Phil Swire. He's a farmer who farms organically, actually, and wanted to get peas that he was growing into the diets of school children locally. So, he was supported by the Soil Association and by Sustain because of, like you said, there's all this kind of processing and storage that needs to happen. and transport to get it to the schools, and then training chefs and all those sort of elements. And he was really successful in that journey. But as a farmer, he couldn't do that alone. He needed that support and that framework. And I think there's equally examples of Welsh Veg in schools, for example, who are doing great work, again, supported and really getting locally grown food, vegetables onto the plates of school children. So it's great to see that that is there.
I think that access piece is really important, because you just said, Ed, as well, that your products are now in a major supermarket. People now have access to foods that have perhaps been grown in a different way, and they can have that choice in front of them. But giving people that access, because it's a whole other conversation, isn't it, about what people can afford to eat, but having that there in a supermarket and working within that system is fantastic.
Yeah, I think there's multiple ways to do that. I think we sort of probably need a blend of like a local food system, but then also, the right products on the shelf and where everybody shops, because not everybody's going to be able to engage or necessarily at the moment afford a local food supply chain. And so, our mission is to try and do it at scale and put it in everybody's hands. But there's also another route to that, which is a more localized model, and I think we need both.
Yeah.
I think the other area that farmers have a huge part to play in is antibiotic resistance, which has obviously a massive impact on human health. And this is the case for, both humans and animals, but every time we use an antibiotic, we increase that risk of antibiotic resistance. So, if we can create systems on farm where animals can thrive and be healthy, we reduce the need for those antibiotics, and it has that knock-on positive effect.
Yeah, and that's sort of a secondary thing, isn't it? It's not, well, it sort of is directly the food they're eating, but it just made me think as well, it's the way food is farmed and produced is also having either a negative or positive impact on things like water quality, for example. And so, people who want to go and swim in clean rivers, it's directly impacted by how their food is produced. And so
Yeah, and it's taking that whole system approach, isn't it? Not just sort of picking parts of it to focus on. It's realising that it's all interconnected.
Yeah, definitely. So what nutritional priorities should agriculture be focused on delivering, do you think?
Sure. So again, I think everyone just looked at me there. We know from the most up-to-date National Diet and Nutrition Survey that our diets are really depleted in fibre. So I think something like 87% of us don't actually get enough fibre, adults and children, which is extremely, having a huge impact on our gut health and our overall health for all the links that we probably in this room already know about. But we don't have enough fruit and veg. None of us really meet the targets for fruit and vegetable consumption. Women of childbearing age aren't getting enough iron, which can have an impact on neural tube defects in newborns. So those are the key nutrients, if you like. And for a long time, we have focused on fat and salt and sugar. And it's not to say we shouldn't look at those things, but there's much more we need to consider within our diets and what we can be producing, which would help to alleviate some of those problems.
Just picking up on that as well, we've got a lot to cut through as farmers, legislation, red tape, lots of information to take in, but it's the same for consumers as well, isn't it? They're being fed so much information that actually you probably don't even know where to start.
And I think sort of something that's come out of that is the fact that red meat has been demonised.
Yeah.
Great source of iron. And, actually it plays a really important part of our overall healthy diets. And, having those ruminants on the land provides that fertility, they're part of that circle of life, that cycle, that nutrient cycling, which is really important.
And that translates, I'm not going to go too much into this because I'm definitely not an expert, just very interested, but that symbiotic relationship between, we'll come on to it later, but livestock, the land, and then what it does for your gut health is really important as well.
Absolutely. I think, I'm sure you're much better on this than I am, but I think we're getting a much greater understanding of how what we affects our gut health. And it's the same for our animals as well, what they're eating in terms of rumen, how it affects their, their rumen microbe population. And it's all related.
Yeah, and I watched a talk yesterday and I watched him last year, Dr. David Unwin, hopefully you're a fan. He talked exactly about that. It's not just what you eat; it's how you eat it, but also how it's produced. And he was looking. In fact, I think it was Eric from Audacious who was showing the differences in like omega 3 to 6 ratios in pasture raised livestock products versus conventionally farmed products, and I mean, it's just, you may as well be eating two different things, in terms of what it does for you.
And for too long, we've really split hairs between ultimately what are whole foods, whether they're animal-based or plant-based. We've focused on that far too much instead of, and that's really been to the advantage, if you like, of companies producing ultra-processed foods, which actually are totally, detrimental to our health. So really, we've looked at the wrong thing, and we need to go back and start to really focus on these kind of nutrient-dense and high-quality nutrition that we need to be producing and consuming.
Yeah. Let's look at then the systems, because what farming systems kind of offer the best synergy, would you say, between, the economic viability and nutritional value? Maybe, Ed, you could start on that one, because I'd like to know a bit more about the systems that you guys use.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking true like economic resilience and viability of a farm, it has to be diverse. And I don't we talk about diversification on farms. It doesn't just mean like having a yurt. It just means like just having a diverse crop rotation if you're an arable farmer, or if you can bolt livestock onto that, even better. And then if you can have renewable energy, or you can have tourist opportunities. I mean, all of these things just make a business much more resilient. But certainly that diversity in what you're doing and what you're producing, and particularly in an arable cropping rotation in our context, is just so critical. And one of the things that we ask our growers to do is to integrate livestock, because of the benefits that we know that it has to the soil, overall fertility, nutrient cycling, and then the product that we get out of the back of it. Absolutely vital. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, the Scottish Government just announced at the Royal Highland Show, that they've brought out a new code of sustainable and regenerative practice. And actually, two of those key things, one of them is crop diversity. So, like you say, diversifying your crop rotation, having a long enough crop rotation to introduce fertility. But also, one of those things is integrating livestock, which I think probably people didn't expect to see. But of course, that references that nutrient cycling potential that they bring, as well as everything else. So,
sort of from the livestock perspective, it's a system where inputs can be reduced and where you have a functioning ecosystem. So that's, your animals working with the land and the other elements. I don't know if any of you have watched the Roots So Deep series of, but they're absolutely brilliant, and I would strongly recommend them. And an entomologist on there says, the best way to get healthy soils is to get that dung into the ground quickly. The best way to get healthy animals is to get dung into the ground quickly. And for that to happen, you need your dung beetles. He said, there's no magic turd fairy. We need this system, like Ed says, that's got this diversity. It's got this diversity in the invertebrate species we're seeing. We can reduce our anthelmintic usage by bringing in different ruminant species that follow each other around the farm. We can, animals can self-medicate if we've got, browsing species like willow in our hedges. And there's tannins that are in like the likes of sandfoin in our herbal leys, again, which can reduce our anthl. It's having this whole system, which we've, already discussed, that works together to benefit everything on the farm. Because everything we do, there is a reaction to it. Yes. And it's are we going to choose something that has a positive reaction, or is it going to have a negative reaction?
Yeah. I'm just going to keep on that topic, because I'll elaborate a bit more on the next question, because it's about adding livestock into rotations. We've kind of addressed that they can be part of a sustainable system. How do we address the kind of perception of that to consumers, maybe? Because the perception is that livestock are bad, and they are part of the problem, when actually they're part of the solution. And just to mention an FG survey that we've recently run around regen, we asked farmers what they thought regen meant, how you farm, and integrating livestock was the least chosen option, which is quite interesting. So how do we address that sort of misconception, I guess?
Well, I wonder if one of the reasons it was sort of the least popular option is because of sort of the infrastructure that people, that does need to, because there is, you can't just put cattle on a field with no boundaries, or sheep on a field with no boundaries. So I wonder perhaps if that comes into it. And so, we've got people now who are doing the grazing on other people's lands, and they're bringing the animals in the equipment. And I think, that's a really positive thing that we're seeing more of. Sorry, Ed.
No, you're good. I mean, I think over the decades, you've done an excellent job of like simplifying and specialising on farms. You've kind of like, I'm a cereal farmer, I'm a pig farmer, I'm a cattle farmer, and we've sort of divorced that over the last few decades, and we're trying to bring that back together. I mean, so far in the sense that most of the livestock in this country is north and west, or south as well, southwest, and then you get big parts of the east which are purely crop production areas. That's how far we've divorced the two. And so we're going through this period of like trying to bring that back, but it's a long way to get there. Like there are parts of the east and the UK which do not have livestock within a massive vicinity of them. And so it isn't just as easy as saying, oh, I'm going to integrate livestock again. And so, but you're right, there's good examples now of flying flocks, flying herds, people that literally run a flock on other people's land, and we're getting there. But I mean, I'm probably part of the problem in those responses, because I've always said that like that fifth principle of regen ag, the integration of livestock, is undoubtedly a benefit, but isn't critical, in the sense that if you look at what we're trying to do with those principles, which is to regenerate soils and an ecosystem and produce better food, etc., if you can integrate livestock, you accelerate that process and you take it to a higher extent, but you can still get there if you don't have the access to livestock.
Yeah, so that's a great way of putting it, yeah.
It's multifactorial, isn't it? I think and it's complex, because I think from a consumer point of view, what's happened is they've been told that meat of any kind is bad because it damages the environment. And generally that's linked to greenhouse gas emissions. In its simplest forms, that's what's happened. And so in people's daily lives, the easiest thing for them to do is make a change. And of course, along have come various products that have told us that will be better for the environment, and people have chosen those naturally. So that's a really simplistic view on it. But ultimately, like you say, in terms of farming systems, livestock obviously they are producing nutritious food for us that we can't actually produce ourselves. Some of these things we can't digest ourselves, and they do that for us, and they return nutrients to the soil. And I think probably we've looked at, say, carbon too hard in some senses, but then not looked at like nitrogen use efficiency and how that kind of fertility from the organic matter that those sources of livestock give us would benefit the soil health. So we've looked at it in too much of a siloed way, effectively, when it's so complex.
We could literally do a whole podcast on this. It's just like...
I know, we've only got half an hour and I'm going to get really told off.
Well, to say, just to go back to your question about, changing the perception around livestock, I think there's a few things there as well. Without the cattle and the dung on the land, we don't get the dung beetles, which were, a huge part of that healthy ecosystem. They're providing fertility into the soil, so we can reduce the fossil fuel input, so it has that positive impact there. We can use them to graze off cover crops, so again, we're not having to use chemicals, ploughing, there's just a multitude of benefits that they bring to a system. And we also have to remember that they are part of the natural carbon cycle.
I mean, we could go into all the ways in which we've got things wrong in terms of our perception of livestock, but I think it would just be easier to say we have a job to do in terms of education, both in terms of the retailers and how they put that message across, but also the consumers. So yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, let's switch it up and we'll skip to that question now. We may as well carry on. What role do we play in terms of public education? Because we have already, there's a lot to do already, as well as telling that story. But in terms of selling ourselves, we are the tellers of our own story, aren't we? We're kind of our own marketeers, I guess. How are you seeing the reaction to your product in supermarkets? Like, is it that story that pushes people to buy that product? Or?
I think what we try to do is get our brand recognised. And because people associate more with a brand than they do a production system necessarily. And so if they recognise our brand and then as a result of that understand what that brand is about and how our products are produced, then that's the way in which we've tried to get the message across on that. But also focusing on like the outcomes of it. I think my personal view is we can get very bogged down in what is regenerative agriculture? What are the principles that we all need to follow? Should we have an audit or a red tractor for regen? I think that's too complicated, and it means a massive piece around re-education to get people to understand that and what it's about. Whereas if we actually just say, well, these general principles produce this, and this being cleaner air, cleaner water, better food, better soil, those are the things that people can get and understand. Like I said, if I choose that loaf of bread, it's good for bees. Or if I choose that, it's better for the rivers that I like to swim in. Like, people can make choices on that, or nutrient density if we get to that point. And so we've tried, that's the route we've tried to take with it. But then also, as I said before, with the kind of local food supply chain, people can tell their own stories, and that's the great thing about it. And that's why I think we need both.
I have to say, I agree and disagree to a sense, because I think you're right. When you've got scale, and we do need to have scale, absolutely, and you have the ability to tell your story, that's fantastic. But for some farmers, that isn't possible. So we do need to make sure we have a legislation and a framework there to enable that route to market, so that it could be told for them. And so we do need to have, obviously, there's the National Food Strategy, which we're in talks of sort of starting off. Whereas in Scotland, we've got the Food Nation Act, which is actually much further ahead, and each local authority and health board will have to have its own good food plan, essentially, as to how they will procure food to be able to meet the nutritional needs. So, it's different for every farm, and we can't expect them to all function at the same level and be a storyteller. And equally, I do feel actually there needs to be some kind of framework for any. We're at Groundswell. Obviously, everyone cares about their soil, but they can do that in so many different ways. And how do you measure their impact fairly if there is no framework around that? So it probably would be advantageous to consider a framework to standardise and still give people the creative freedom to farm in diverse ways, but it needs to be measurable to show its impact.
If I may come back on that again very quickly.
Having
a framework is great, but it doesn't guarantee outcomes. So we can all do a bit less tillage and we could all do a bit more diversity, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get the outcomes that we're all looking for, which is why we're so keen on actually measuring the end goal. So why are we doing all these things? Because we want this, so let's measure this, and then we can tell that story.
And in doing that, you've created your own framework in a sense. So you've made it.
There's always got to be a framework that supports those outcomes. Otherwise, we're never going to get them. But we start,
I was going to say, I think as humans, we're really bad at trying to simplify things. Yeah. And it's got to fit in this box or this box, or it needs to be, we need to be able to tick this or tick that. And, nature is complex. Our food system is complex. And I think and I understand, it isn't possible for every farm to welcome people on and for people to, go onto every farm. But there have been so many studies that show if we get people out into nature, the benefits and the greater understanding that they have. And I've been sat on a steering group for a project down in South Devon that was about just that. Getting people out onto the land, and they got people from the local community, often underprivileged people, out onto farms that wouldn't usually host people and people who wouldn't usually visit a farm. And just the understanding and the respect that grew from both sides was just incredible. People had a much better, understanding of the challenges that farmers are facing, especially in these current times. And that connection to nature, just had so many positive benefits. And I understand it's not easy, but I think it's such a good thing to do that is something we should definitely be thinking about doing more of.
Let's talk about incentives then, because is there enough incentive, do you think, for farmers to grow more nutrient-dense foods? And it could be financial, it could be technical assistance, it could be grants, whatever. But should they also be paid for nutrient density?
I personally believe so, yeah. How often do we all make choices on purchases based on quality? Not just in food, in anything, whether clothes you buy, your car you buy, we make those choices all the time. And so there's good precedent for people making those kind of choices. And so why shouldn't that apply to food? We just haven't found a way of being able to measure that and put it on a shelf yet.
Yeah.
We're getting there, we're close.
Yeah. It's a societal value as well, isn't it? And how we approach it.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think absolutely farmers should be rewarded for the good work they're doing. I think we just need to be really careful as a society that we don't then create a two-tier system, for those who can afford and those who can't. It's really important that this healthy, nutritious food we are producing is available to everyone.
But that's the question of who pays for it.
Absolutely.
Does the consumer pay for it, or actually is there somewhere in that vast universe of middle bit that could actually just be a bit smaller?
Yeah, I have to say I'm kind of split on this one, in all honesty, because I agree we shouldn't have a two-tier system, and good food shouldn't be a premium. It should be normal for everyone to be able to access proper food, and lots of people have a role to play in that. So farmers shouldn't be expected to shoulder the burden of taking risk and trying something new, and absolutely that needs to be supported, and they need to be financially supported to do that, but it shouldn't necessarily be an elite club, and we should actually have it, everyone should be able to access good, healthy, nutritious food produced sustainably.
There was this thing once called SFI, I think it was, that actually was quite a nice support mechanism for facilitating change in this direction. I don't know what happened to that. Yeah.
Nobody does. And again,
That's a question for another day.
That is a whole other podcast. Yeah. Okay, last question now, because we need to wrap up soon. But there is a push for there's apparently a push for public procurement. We've got a drive to bring pressure on the NHS down. That's the Prime Minister said that himself. But I don't know how we balance that if we're not going to have this stable food system to be able to feed people properly. How can the government help create a demand for nutrient dense UK grown food? We can discuss things like labelling, we can discuss things like trying to get those shorter supply chains into schools or hospitals. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, there's many mechanisms and drivers definitely at play there. And as I said, we mentioned the National Food Strategy, in which they're in talks with, and we should definitely be making public procurement standards front and centre of that, because really that shows respect to our farmers who are producing it, gives them route to market, and puts public health right at the centre of that as well. So as I say, we're kind of ahead slightly in Scotland in getting that together, and it's happening down south as well. So that needs to be key. And I don't know if it's about creating demand. I think it's just literally changing the landscape of the food system and the food service kind of outlets and things. And yeah, public settings, schools, hospitals do have a real power in changing what we eat day to day and influencing children's choices. And we need to totally strip away the things that we've been used to having, which are actually very expensive. And like you say, I think it's the Food and Farming Countryside Commission actually who commissions the work, which showed that it's something like £200 billion cheaper, is that right? Yeah, for the nation to eat healthily. It is cheaper, it is a cost saving in itself. And we have got examples in catering outlets and things where they can train their chefs and produce food much more cheaply than they could do buying imported frozen ready meals and all that sort of thing. So we have good case studies, and they need to be made into policy across the board, essentially.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's all good.
I was just going to say, I think it was that same study that said that we are we the second highest country in the Western world to, the amount of processed foods that we eat behind America?
Yeah, that's right.
That's massive.
Yes, it is. It is. And the impact on our health, well, we all know, we don't need to go into it anymore probably, but the impact on our health is devastating. And I see that. I work in intensive care, and I see young people coming in with comorbidities that are diet related, and that to me feels like we have failed. So we need to do more.
Yeah, I think they've got multiple roles really. It's definitely education, their own procurement. If government departments actually set the example in terms of how they procure their food, it would be a good place to start. Labelling possibly. I mean, that's my personal ultimate ambition for the food industry, is that rather than, maybe as well as having a green, amber, red for salt, fat and sugars, that we actually have other nutrients on there. Antioxidants, polyphenols, however we choose to take those metrics forward. It would be nice for consumers to have that choice. But I mean, it would be a great start if the Department of Education, Health and DEFRA actually sat around the table together and they go, hang on a minute, guys, there's huge possibilities here. We can work together, but seemingly that's not possible. So yeah, I mean, that would be a good start.
I would third the education system. There's some farms doing absolutely brilliant work to get children out to visit them, and I just think that's so important. I do think there has to be some, legislation changes. It's like companies spend billions of pounds on marketing, so that when we walk into a supermarket, we are faced with stands, often full of ultra processed food. How would that dial shift if we walked in and we were presented with, fresh fruit or that was, in the little bits by the tills, there was fruit and veg there rather than chocolate bars. And, I don't think any supermarket, and understandably so, is going to do that voluntarily. So I do think the government has, a part to play alongside all these other things in delivering that change.
Yeah. I've been given the signal, so that's the end of this discussion, but thank you very much. I'm just going to end with a question that I ask everybody in this series. And that's, can you sum up the future of farming in 3 words? Surprise.
Wow.
Diverse,
Yeah.
nutritious, resilient.
Nice. I'll copy your first one. Diverse, healthy, and profitable.
Yeah.
I'm going to say livestock,
Yeah.
nature, and systems.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you for joining us. You can check out all the other episodes in the On Air at Groundswell series now. If you want to learn more, you can search for the School of Sustainable Food and Farming. Thank you and goodbye for now.